Today we are joined by Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, the executive at the BRICS Business Council, on these conversations and series talking about the path to India. What is South Africa bringing to India in this coming summit? Doctor, how are you?
Yanda, thanks very much for having me. I'm very well indeed, and great pleasure to be here today.
You're welcome at BRICS Africa channel. Please tell us, maybe we can start back in 12 years ago when you and other leaders in business started this idea and a vision that there has to be a BRICS Business Council. Tell us more about that.
As you correctly point out, the council was established in 2013 at the Durban Summit, the BRICS Durban Summit. It was in fact inaugurated by the 5 heads of state at the time, including our own president. Our first chairperson was Patrice Motsepe. And the idea of establishing a council came about because as business people, we were going on trade missions, meeting other businesses, but the discussions were actually happening government to government. And that just created a layer, sort of another layer, where the people that were going to write and sign the deals were not the people speaking to each other. So it made a lot of sense to have a business council to operationalize a lot of those conversations. So the way we operate today is you've got the governments, which have their bilaterals, and they discuss economic cooperation, trade and investment and commerce. But then you've got the business people operating at a level below, where we discuss issues around policy, tariff and non-tariff barriers to entry, regulatory burden, but more importantly, where do the deals sit? So that's the idea of having a council. It's complementary to the work that the governments are doing.
And fast forward to today, normally you would sit during the years. Have you had any meetings with the BRICS Business Council in India?
The council meets twice a year. By protocol, it meets twice a year. The first meeting is the annual general meeting. And at that meeting, it's an in-person meeting. The agenda is set by the host country. So in this instance, it will be India in September. They will set the agenda for the ensuing 12 months. We will have a mid-term review, which is virtual usually, and that would happen 6 months into the presidency of India. Of course, what we try and do is have continuity from summit to summit. And that's why the Business Council has a very separate business agenda. There's a business forum. Usually the heads of state, or some of them at least, attend the business forum. So it's a different activity, but complementary to what the summit is trying to achieve in its overall design.
Last month, I think the Business Council South Africa chapter met, and you discussed, I would imagine, the strategies that you are taking or you want to champion in the summit coming.
We did indeed. So I think a lot of the planning that goes into executing a successful summit is very much dependent on the pre-planning, identifying the priorities early on, but also looking at when you're the host country, which is India in this instance. In 2 years' time, we will be the host country. You get to set and shape the agenda. Now, if you're not setting the agenda that particular year, it's important that you weave into the overall agenda those objectives that are important to you, those issues that are important to you as a country. And that's exactly what last month's planning meeting was about. Now, the theme for the India Summit in September is resilience, innovation, cooperation, and sustainability. Now, all of those thematics speak to thematics that resonate with us as both South Africa and also as a business community in South Africa. Now, one of those aspects, and an area that we've been incredibly seized with over the last 3 years, in fact, since we hosted the BRICS Summit here in Sandton 3 years ago as South Africa, the Business Council has been seized with interrogating almost the trade patterns. Now, the trade patterns very high level, what are those trade patterns demonstrating to us? They're demonstrating that with just about all the BRICS plus countries, we run a trade deficit. Now, trade deficits per se are not, they're not offensive per se, but what does make them offensive is if you're not sitting down with your partners and working out where are those areas where you can export more, where are those areas where you can collaborate more to attract investment. So I don't have a problem with trade deficits. I'm never going to expect that South Africa will run a surplus with China or with India. That's just not going to happen. But what's important is that we examine those deficits. What are the products that we could be producing here and exporting to narrow those deficits? So that's the first thing we look to do. The second thing is investigating and examining these trade patterns also allows you to see where are the cooperative opportunities. So, for example, if we are importing cars from India and China, okay, and we run a huge trade deficit in the automotive sector vis-a-vis those two countries, but yet we've got our own car manufacturing and our own assembling in this country. How do we use that information to leverage local production with a Chinese partner, with an Indian partner? So that's the benefit of that exercise. And that's why we will keep beating the trade pattern drum, not because we have a problem with a deficit, but because we see the opportunity in a deficit. Now, the very last thing that these trade patterns have demonstrated to us is that we continue as a country to export raw materials, commodities, and minerals. We export them out the country, but then we import them back as finished manufactured products, value-added manufactured products. All the value is outside the country, very little value coming here, and you pay 20 times the price. Again, now, that's something else that we need to be addressing. In the BRICS context, 85% of our exports to BRICS and BRICS Plus is commodities, raw materials, and minerals. Now, there's a great opportunity to change both that narrative and also to change that trade pattern. And that's what we seek to do as a council, as a lead up to the Indian summit, which is only 2 months away now. Now, the other thing, lastly, that we'll do, and what we'll try and position as the South African chapter certainly, is, I said to you, the thematics included innovation. Now, innovation is very important. It's not an area we do particularly well in our country at the moment. And it's not about how much do you spend of GDP on innovation. It's how do you prioritize certain innovation projects in the country. And we've certainly got expertise. Look at the SKA initiative down in the Karoo. So we've got that expertise, but it is how do we leverage our BRICS partners to accelerate innovation. And I can't say that innovation is a standalone concept. It's got to be seen together with industrialization and manufacturing. So I see innovation, industrialization, manufacturing. And that's another area that we'll be promoting with a great degree of effort, I suspect, as the South African chapter when we go to India.
I ask myself, China came out in May saying that the tariffs are gone, but it sounds as if it doesn't matter much if you're still not beneficiating. So you are just accelerating sending out raw materials. And I ask myself, you've got instruments. Yes, it was a bit shaky whether we're going to retain AGOA, but why can't BRICS have such innovations as the AGOA instrument into the BRICS countries to improve the trade?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And now I'm pleased you raised this because there was certainly a lot of excitement around this zero tariffs for Africa by China. But if you examine that a little more closely, it doesn't mean that you are suddenly going to industrialize or significantly increase exports of finished products value-added finished products, because that's what we want to do. We want to a degree, narrow that trade deficit with China and with India as well. So we are going to have to look at something more creative than just a reduction in tariffs. Now, China has visited South Africa a number of times with inward buying missions. In fact, the last inward buying mission was in 2023. It preceded President Xi's visit because President Xi's presence at BRICS was preceded a few hours before the summit with a state visit. And President Ramaphosa received President Xi, and as a prelude to that, there was this inward buying mission which committed to buy $2 billion US dollars of South African manufactured goods. Now, regrettably, we haven't achieved anywhere near that target, is my understanding. So we do need to see how are we going to execute on these inward buying mission commitments. It's $2 billion, if you kickstart with $2 billion of South African manufactured goods to China, whether it's wine or whatever it is, I mean, that's certainly a good way to kickstart some form of accelerated exports, but it's not happening right now.
What's the bottleneck? What seems to be the bottleneck of it now?
I think the bottleneck is we have to still be competitive. We can't say, look, here's $2 billion, and we'll buy from you at any price and do 5 times the price. We can't do that. And I'm not suggesting we are uncompetitive. I need to be clear. I'm not suggesting our manufacturers are uncompetitive. Our manufacturers just don't have the scale. Because if you can start matching Chinese and Indian scale, and maybe to a less extent Brazilian scale, then you will be competitive. Manufacturing, and that's what we've centered this interview about, think about it, has been around industrialization and manufacturing in many respects, which is a priority for our country. Now, if we start matching the scale of a China, which we're never going to get to, I understand that. But if we start growing our economies of scale, we start getting more volume throughput to our factories, we will become more competitive. And how are we going to do that? I believe charity starts at home. It's exceedingly disappointing for me as a business person sitting here, knowing that we've had preferential procurement framework policy legislation since 1996. And 3 decades later, we are still not seeing in most departments and ministries, municipalities, SOEs, etc., we are not seeing support for locally manufactured products. Yet localization, industrialization is a priority for our government. So how can that be? The public procurement bill was assented to by President Ramaphosa May 2024. It's now 26, 27 months down the line. We still don't have the regulations for that. So what am I saying here? I'm saying 2 things. Number one, we have to leverage domestic volumes to create global and export competitiveness in the first instance. In the second instance, we do need to create more effective levers with our partners, China and others. And the AGOA concept is a very good one. I'm very pleased that you raised that. And that's the type of creative levers we need to establish with China so that we do start balancing trade out a little more. I think we need to be more proactive around speaking to our Chinese partners and saying, look, we've got capability around green energy. We've got capability around manufacturing, car manufacturing, pharmaceuticals. Come and invest here and partner us. And then we can also export those products to China.
It sounds to me there's no monitoring and evaluation, but also when I look at India, I mean, India is probably one of the few countries that has a large portion of middle class. So if you don't need to do everyone and every audience in India, but if you just focus and say your high value end will just focus in India on that middle class, surely South Africa can be able to then, otherwise we we tend to want to play the global space and focus on the spaza shops?
Look, Ayanda, why do we want to be in BRICS in the first place? Okay. We want to be there because BRICS is almost, as a formation, 30% of the world's GDP. So you cannot afford to not be there.
Sure.
Because I know BRICS has had its critics, and people say, well, wow, we members, but what are we getting out of it? But quite frankly, you can't afford to not be part of it, because anything that constitutes a third of the world's economy, you have to be part of. Now, when we look at how are we maximizing benefits, are we optimizing the situation? The answer is clearly no. But I also don't want to say that there's been no progress, because our trade within the BRICS formation, and it's still early to pass any judgment on the BRICS Plus, because it's only been in an expanded form for 2 years. So my reference point very often is the original 5 BRICS countries. Now, if you look at it on that basis, our trade with the BRICS countries has grown faster than our trade with the rest of the world. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area represents a significant opportunity where South Africa can be a fulcrum in Africa's trade with the BRICS countries. I don't have to remind any of your viewers that there is a significant, what we call, youth dividend and a demographic dividend that is coming out of Africa. Why? Because by 2050, 1 of 4 citizens on this planet will be an African, and they will be mainly young people. The older populations will sit in Asia and in Europe and in North America, and these are your economically active, tech-savvy demographics. So there's immense value in looking to partner Africa, and I'm seeing South Africa as being the fulcrum between Africa Continental Free Trade Area and the African continent, with all the demographic dividends I spoke about earlier, and then the fastest growing economies, because the fastest growing economies in the world generally sit in BRICS. So if you map all of that out, BRICS continues to present a very viable value proposition for South Africa, but more importantly, for my constituency business, South African business.
But if you can say that, I mean, I'll maybe go back to China and all its payment systems. I ask myself, I think Mr. Kganyago came up with, yes, we are starting digital currencies, but the payment systems is what our viewers wants to know of, like, what is the BRICS chapter, more than just the understanding of, like, we don't need to have, we can diversify the payment systems. We don't need to choose this payment system over the other payment system. But doesn't seem to be clarity. And yet, when we're here, 2023, the heads of state said, no, we'll leave it to Mr. Kotongwana and his colleagues to really map out. Do we still have that map, or is it going to be a YouTube myth that BRICS actually has a payment system coming?
Ayanda, earlier we spoke about tariffs. Now, what's even more important, in my humble view, in this whole BRICS economic discussion is non-tariff barriers to entry. And those can take many forms and shapes. It could be around regulatory aspects, it could be phytosanitary, it could be various standards, etc. But it also involves your competitiveness around payment systems. Right now, if you are a South African company and you wish to export your products to China, for example, or to Brazil, whoever it might be, within BRICS, what are you doing? You have to convert rands into dollars. Okay, so there's a cost involved, and there's a time lag involved, and there's an efficiency issue. Then you've got to sell those dollars, okay, into the local currency, which could be the Brazilian real, for example, or the Indian rupee, whichever it is. Okay, and then very often, whoever you're dealing with has to convert it back to dollars to pay, to pay you
Sure.
at whatever the return payments. It could be a credit they got to pass on to you, or whatever the case might be. That is a highly inefficient way. So we've never advocated as a BRICS Business Council de-dollarization, because this is where you start entering the realms of controversy. And I'm not even sure where that concept came from, because it's certainly nothing we've ever discussed in the BRICS Business Council. What we are hugely in favor of as a council is an easier way of doing business, reducing red tape and administrative burden. And part of that is settlement in local currency. Because then you're cutting out all this conversion. Every time there's a cost and every time there's a banker sitting there that's going to take a percentage of this. So we are hugely in favor of local currency settlements. Now, we are starting to see local currency settlements, more efficient payment systems. For example, in SADC, there's a Pan-African one that's emerging. And the Indians are also looking at a rupee facility right now. So I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of these local integrated payment systems, which reduce the cost of doing business. Because if you have logistics that are inefficient, and then you don't have the scale, as I said earlier, and then on top of that, you've got inefficient payment systems, and people have to wait a long time to receive their payment, then you are not going to be competitive.
But is there harmonization within the reserve banks, at least within the BRICS Plus, or just the BRICS countries? Are there those conversations? Is there research that's been done? Is the CSIR, with all these mechanics that and talent they have, with capabilities of leading us towards that faster than another 10 years to wait?
Look, the central bankers and the finance ministries are most certainly engaging in this conversation. They are very, very deliberate, I think, in terms of promoting local currency settlement options. And there's also a contingency reserve that's been built up as well. So these are some of the discussions that are happening. Am I happy sitting here as a business person who's got a business in, we're in Brazil, we're in China, we're in India, we're in Russia, and we're in a couple of the other BRICS Plus countries. I don't want to mention all of them, but I'm also not disregarding them. But suffice to say that as a business person sitting here, I'm not satisfied at the speed at which that is happening. And again, this is, I need to be clear, not a de-dollarization discussion, because I don't think that's practical either, incidentally. I think what we are favoring is, and the whole world favors this, not just us, more efficient payment systems and reducing the cost of doing business.
Just three things maybe to close off that you wish or you would work towards if it was your championship, like the FIFA World Cup, to say, hey, we went to India, we came back, at least we are on the agenda going forward. What would those be?
Okay, my three things. Firstly, we are hosting the Cricket World Cup as South Africa in 2027. So seeing that you raised sport, okay, I'm expecting that there will be a lot of Indian tourists that come, sports tourists they call them. So that will be an opportunity, I think, for us to showcase our cricket team. I'm not going to say who's going to win the final. I don't want to be undiplomatic in this interview, but
it will be a good game with the final between India and South Africa.
South Africa, yes, and we're not going to pick a winner. But I'm using that sport analogy deliberately because we need to look at what are those sectors that are going to move the needle for South Africa in a BRICS context. And one of those is, in fact, tourism. The other one is manufacturing, green energy. I'm kind of lumping those together. And then we have got a significant strategic advantage in minerals, rare earth metals, critical minerals, which we are not sufficiently leveraging as a country for industrialization purposes. So now let me give you my 3 things, right? The first thing is we've got to keep beating the drum around trade patterns and equalizing trade patterns, but more importantly, finding the opportunities, the export opportunities within that milieu of trade patterns that we are seeing. Number 2, we need to keep beating the industrialization drum. Part of the benefits, I believe, of being in BRICS is that you have 48%, I'm just going to call it 50%, of the world's population resides in BRICS. It's also the fastest growing economies. Now, that should present a great opportunity for us to leverage volumes to boost local manufacturing and industrialization. The third area is that we need to keep speaking to our governments to accelerate some of these reforms, particularly non-tariff reforms that I spoke about earlier. But I'm also not going to forget what I said to you earlier in the interview, that charity starts at home.
Sure.
And we have to start leveraging domestic volumes, particularly in my sector. I'm very critical of what goes on in my sector because we import most of our medicines, yet we've got huge capacities to manufacture in this country. But then we've got our government saying that industrialization is a priority. But I look at antiretrovirals. Every year, we import more and more antiretrovirals. We've got the biggest population of HIV-infected people in the world. I can say the same thing with tablets and capsules. So charity must also start at home. That's not a BRICS issue. It's a domestic issue. But I do want to say the reason I've been very vocal around that aspect is that we do need to leverage domestic volumes so that we can improve our export orientation.
Dr. Stavros, thank you for joining us on the BRICS Africa channel.
Thanks very much for having me. Much appreciated.
That's all.